Godzilla 1984, also known as the Return of Godzilla, was the first entry in the Heisei-Godzilla series, and was also the first Godzilla movie in nearly a decade after Terror of Mechagodzilla. By the time we reached that movie, the series had become more lighter in tone, but Tomoyuki Tanaka wanted to revive the series once again and take it back to its darker roots. So in an effort to stay faithful to the original movie, the next Godzilla film would not only be released for the original's 30th anniversary, but it would also be a direct sequel to the 1954 film, while ignoring all the movies made between 1955 and 1975. Yep, a complete reboot of the series. The plot of Godzilla 1984 involves the revival of a new Godzilla 30 years after the events of the original movie, who starts going around terrorizing Japan. The majority of the movie consists of the humans trying to find a way to stop Godzilla, but during this, we're greeted to a new Godzilla design and some newer looking miniatures and practical effects work. We already saw this in the past 15 movies, but this was the first time we saw a more modernized take on it. The attention to detail on these miniatures are incredible. Every scene of Godzilla in the city is a real spectacle to view. This is very much an effects movie, and it's really fascinating how they did the effects for Godzilla in this film. Godzilla's once again in a rubber suit, which looks decent. The body looks just right, but I have mixed feelings about the face. On the suit, sometimes it can look alright, but other times it just looks kinda ridiculous. He still looks great in motion though, and that's all that's important. Oh, and the suit was plainly called 84 Goji. Ha. Not only was Godzilla a suit again, but this time, Toho built a 16-foot robotic Godzilla for close-up shots. The head on this one looks a little better. Not to mention, look at how massive this thing was. Holy crap. Yeah, there's nothing else to say about the actual plot. It's heavily focused on the humans trying to stop Godzilla, and there's no other monster involved for Godzilla to fight. It's the standard Godzilla movie with amazing visual effects, and with some slow, suspenseful scenes. I love the bit midway through the movie where Godzilla's in the city just breaking everything apart. It's probably my favorite part of the whole movie because I love seeing those practical sets get blown up and destroyed. Godzilla even picks up a train just to terrorize the people inside it. He really does just move around slowly, being intimidating with his dumb face. I love it. There is one new weapon that the humans invent called the Super X, a spaceship looking device that they try to use to inject something into Godzilla to slow down his heart and knock him out. It's pretty amusing seeing the characters try to find new ways of stopping Godzilla. I also like the theme music for the super effects weapon. Yeah, the soundtrack is quite decent. It's not Akira Ifukube, though they did approach him about composing this movie, but he declined because I assume he was retired by this point. But it is still a decent soundtrack all around. I do wish the Godzilla theme could have been worked in somehow. Another thing to note about this movie is how it's been distributed, which is a story all in itself. First thing to note is that the movie had a relatively disappointing box office run in Japan, initially. So Toho looked to release it theatrically in the States to try and regain some of its lost profits. It was released in America in 1985 under the new title Godzilla 1985. Simple enough. The film was heavily re-edited and reportedly took out 20 minutes of footage and effects from the Japanese cut. Not only that, but the American filmmakers decided to bring back Raymond Burr as the character he played in the 1956 version of Godzilla, Steve Martin. But since now the actor and comedian Steve Martin was famous, Burr's character is now just referred to as Mr. Martin. How funny. It's pretty cool that they decided to make this re-edited version a sequel to the 1956 version of the original film. I'm sure fans of that version must have been pretty happy to see that. Unfortunately, there's been a long-standing legal issue going on with Godzilla 1985 that to this day has still caused the movie to be unable to get a DVD or Blu-ray release. The Japanese cut also never saw a release in the States until 2016 when Kraken Releasing finally released that version here on DVD and Blu-ray, which is the copy that I own. The American cut, Godzilla 1985, has never been released on DVD and Blu-ray, and doesn't seem like it'll happen anytime soon. I would've liked if both the Japanese and American cuts would be sold side by side with each other, kinda like the original Godzilla, but we're still not quite in that timeline just yet. Oh well. I still prefer the Japanese cut, but I do feel bad for fans of the American cut having to only own this movie on VHS. Dang. Anyways, Godzilla 1984 is a pretty good movie. It's a solid reboot that may not have been successful financially, but it does pack a good punch in a lot of areas. It's not as entertaining as later movies, but I do think it's still worth checking out for its great visual effects and decent Godzilla scenes. It's a good watch in my book. Next time we'll look at the sequel that came out 5 years later, where Godzilla got to fight another monster this time. After the disappointment of Godzilla 1984's box office, Tomioka Tanaka felt the world wasn't ready for a second Godzilla revival. However, after the success of Little Shop of Horrors in 1986, Tanaka changed his mind. Godzilla vs. Biollante was created after a public contest was made to submit ideas for the next film's script. The winner came up with an idea that's pretty out there. At the end of Godzilla 1984, Godzilla fell down a volcano and was thought to be dead after this. While cleaning up and inspecting the destruction left behind by Godzilla, a few of his skin cells were found, and this leads to an experiment where they combine the skin cells with a plant, which leads to the creation of a giant monster, Biollante, who initially starts out as a giant rose monster, but then becomes sort of a piranha plant of sorts. Yeah, this didn't exactly work out too well. Also, it's pretty ironic that the winner chose an idea that's related to Little Shop of Horrors, the exact movie that made Tomioka Tanaka change his mind about reviving Godzilla for a second series. There's one important human character to note here, who's Miki Sagusa, played by Megumi Odaka. She's important because she's gonna have a role in almost every single Godzilla movie up to vs. Destoroyah. She's a telepath who's able to find out that the volcano Godzilla fell down in didn't actually kill him. Instead, he rises out the back of the volcano and continues his destruction of Japan. Why is it always Japan? Anyways, I love this Godzilla design. And thankfully, it's gonna be the main design for the rest of the Heisei series. This is the absolute perfect design for Godzilla. First nicknamed Biogoji, this suit has the perfect body structure and a beyond perfect head for its time. This is the true way of reinventing a character for a modern audience. Even though its first appearance was in 1989, this is the true 90s look for Godzilla. It's absolutely wonderful. Biollante is also one of the scariest Godzilla monsters ever, and one of the most unique. One of the last original monsters we'll get in quite a while, so let's cherish this monster while we still have her. Her effects are also incredible to do research on. She was one of the most complex animatronics Toho ever built, needing dozens of strings to operate her tentacles and other things. It's also been said that a cat had kittens in the Toho headquarters, and the kittens were placed inside the Biollante head so they would have a place to stay. If this is true, that's both adorable and creepy. Godzilla fights Biollante 2 times, first when she's a rose, and again when she's grown to be a giant piranha plant, which happens near the end of the movie. They're pretty solid fights. The final fight is one of my favorites out of a Godzilla movie. What's pretty interesting is that Biollante bleeds green, and it's quite disgusting seeing her bleed all over Godzilla in both fights. But it's always been a detail that I thought was very cool. There's also a pretty great scene where the military sent out the Super X Mark II. Yeah, a second Super X. Which has a pretty decent fight with Godzilla, although it is brief. I like seeing reoccurring ideas in these movies to help build continuity. This is one of the first times they tried doing this with a Godzilla film that'll thankfully last longer than just 2 movies. The monster fights are spectacular, and when Godzilla's on screen, it's a sheer joy to watch. But everything else in the movie is just kinda okay. The human story did take a while to grow on me. At first I thought it was kinda dull, but now I think it's just alright. I like seeing American actors appear in these movies now, even though their acting sucks, but at least it's amusing to watch.
She's not a bad sight.
This isn't a beauty contest.
You're right. Okay.
The film score is also pretty decent. It's pretty standard soundtrack affair stuff. Nothing too special. The Godzilla theme is back, which is always great, and this rearrangement sounds amazing. We also get this 80s-tastic remix of the theme called Bio Wars, which I recommend looking up because it sounds absolutely amazing. Somebody mod that into Super Smash Bros. Like, for real. You know who hated this remix though? Akira Ifukube, the original composer of Godzilla. Yeah, he didn't like this soundtrack too much, and especially hated the Biowars track for modernizing the famous Godzilla theme. That's kinda funny. The relevance of me bringing this up will make more sense in the next review. Anyways, Godzilla vs. Biollante is a decent flick. It's a solid sequel to Godzilla 1984, and has some pretty amazing monster fights. It's got solid effects, a decent soundtrack, and some pretty fun human characters, especially the psychic Mickey character that I mentioned earlier. It's an important movie for rejuvenating the interest in Godzilla, leading to a fantastic revival series. Like, if you thought this movie was good, you have no clue what you're in for when it comes to the later movies. I'm excited to talk about them. The Heisei-Era is actually my favorite series of Godzilla Godzilla movies. Let's go! We're about halfway done with this marathon, so let's not stop while we're ahead. Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. One of the best Godzilla movies ever, like bar none. This is one of the best entries in the Heisei series. The plot involves a group of time travelers from the 23rd century who go back to the year 1992 AD. The reason they traveled back in time is to stop Godzilla from existing, because he's gonna destroy Japan in the future. So they team up with a group of people in 1992 to go back to the 1940s and stop the original Godzillasaurus from being mutated into Godzilla. Oh, and this leads us to a scene where a few bad American actors see the future people's ship fly by. The acting's not very good, but it's actually still a pretty amusingly funny scene once you get past the bad acting.
It did look like it was from another planet, but... Shall we report it, sir?
What, that we're being invaded by little green men from outer space? Let's just keep it as our secret. You can tell your son about it when he's born, Major Spielberg.
Sir, yes, sir!
I always found it pretty interesting that we got to see the original Godzilla before he was Godzilla, a Godzillasaurus who was attacked by a group of American soldiers, while the Japanese soldiers stayed back since the Godzillasaurus was actually fending off the Americans away from their group. Another thing to notice, when the Godzillasaurus roars, it sounds like Gamera? Huh, interesting. Before the Godzillasaurus dies, the Japanese general salutes to the monster for inadvertently saving their lives, shortly before leaving it on the island. Also, this was very important to mention for later. I always felt bad for the Godzillasaurus in this scene. It was such a defenseless animal against our military weapons. Poor thing. Anyways, after the Japanese soldiers leave, the people of the future in 1992 teleport the Godzillasaurus away from the island and replaces him with these three cute little creatures called Dorats. Aww. But after doing this, they return to 1992 to find that the three Dorats were mutated into one being after the bomb dropped, and they became the powerful King Ghidorah. So while Godzilla may not exist anymore, King Ghidorah is still here to destroy everything. It turns out this was the future people's plan all along, to have King Ghidorah destroy all of Tokyo, and were nearly successful at eradicating Godzilla from existence, but surprise bitch, bet you thought you'd seen the last of him. A new Godzilla was created using a nuclear sub, and this one's even bigger and more powerful than the last Godzilla. So with Godzilla back, Ghidorah can finally be disposed of. This leads to one of the greatest monster fights in Godzilla history. Seriously, it kicks ass seeing Godzilla and Ghidorah go at it with newer special effects. I also love the way Ghidorah looks too. This was such a great improvement of his original look. It just fits right into the 90s. It almost shows how timeless his design always was. So Godzilla attacks this mofo to the ground again, and even blasts his middle head off. Holy shit. Afterwards, Godzilla just fries his wings off and causes Ghidorah to fall into the ocean. Well, Ghidorah was taken care of, but we still got Godzilla around destroying everything. This ends up leading to a pretty gruesome scene in the movie. Remember the military general I mentioned who gave a salute to the Godzillasaurus for saving his and his soldiers' lives? Well, several decades later, he recognizes that Godzilla is the same monster he encountered in World War II, and feels incredibly attached to him. So much so that he allows Godzilla to do this to him. Jesus fucking Christ, that was brutal. Who else has taken a Godzilla atomic blast straight to the face? Holy shit. God, that's how I hope I die. With Godzilla having killed Ghidorah and wreaking more havoc in Japan, the good guys from the future come up with an amazing plan. In the future, they take the remains of Ghidorah from the ocean and reconstruct him into a fucking robot, Mecha King Ghidorah. Oh my god, that is awesome. And it leads to a pretty excellent fight. This is such a great movie. You know what makes it even better? The soundtrack. This is the first Godzilla movie in 16 years to be composed by the one and only Akira Ifukube. It's pretty funny how he decided to come back to this series. For both Godzilla 1984 and vs. Biollante, he was approached to do the music for those movies, but he declined both times. It wasn't until after vs. Biollante when his own daughter said to him, "So why don't you just do the next one yourself?" So he did. He returned to score the soundtrack for this movie, two of its sequels, and vs. Destoroyah. It's great having the master back to work his craft, and it greatly helps the movie on multiple occasions. And the movie has probably my favorite arrangement of the Godzilla theme ever. Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah is one of the best Godzilla movies ever made. Some of the best practical effects work in any of these movies, some of the best monster fights ever put to screen, an amazing film score, and a solid human story with a lot of layers added to it. This is one of my favorites in the franchise, and I highly recommend this to anyone, especially if you're a Godzilla fan and you somehow have not seen this movie. It really is one of the greats. Excellent film. Next time we're going to look at another pretty solid movie. After the success of Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, Toho started making Godzilla movies year after year until 1995. The next film would be a soft reboot of sorts of the 1964 film Mothra vs. Godzilla. A group of island explorers are on a new version of Infant Island, where they end up coming across a giant egg. Yeah, if you saw the original Mothra vs. Godzilla, you know exactly where this is going. We also got to see a new version of the Twin Fairies, though this time, instead of being played by twins, they're played by two actresses that just so happen to look alike. Hey, if it works, it works. This time the Twin Fairies are known as the Cosmos, who bring balance to the Earth. Meanwhile, a meteorite lands in the sea, and inside of it contains a larva monster named Batra. You see, Batra was also originally meant to bring balance to the Earth. However, upon getting attacked by the military, he sees all of humanity as a threat to the Earth and goes on a rampage in Japan. Not only that, but Mothra hatches from her egg, then her twin fairies get kidnapped, so she ends up going on a mini rampage of her own too. God damn, two monsters attacking Japan? Sure would suck if Godzilla was here. Oh wait. Yep, Godzilla's here too, and has some pretty decent fights with both Mothra and Batra. Afterwards, Mothra and Batra evolve into their adult forms and team up to stop Godzilla. That's pretty much the plot. Godzilla vs. Mothra is a very solid follow-up. It does an amazing job reintroducing Mothra, and I really like the new direction the Twin Fairies went in to help give them a bigger role in this movie. I really love how the underwater fights look. These were also some of the last scenes to use the original Biollante suit. Yeah, it was getting worn out by this point, so Toho constructed a newer, much similar looking suit, mainly because why fix what isn't broken? The new suit was called Beito Goji, in case you wanted to know. One interesting piece of trivia for this movie is that the first Biollante suit was actually stolen during production. Yeah, a bunch of pranksters somehow got in Toho's film studio and stole this massive Godzilla suit. Don't worry, it was found on a random beach somewhere and was shortly returned to Toho afterwards. To this day, Toho still has no clue who the actual perpetrators were. Such a fascinating story to look up on. It even made the news here in America when these movies weren't even being released here.
Unbelievably, someone has stolen the rubber Godzilla model from a Japanese special effects department in Tokyo. The model was made for a new Godzilla movie coming out in Japan. Now, the theft won't affect the film's premiere. I'm sure you're glad to hear that. I know. Jerry's relieved. But the 13-foot high-tech model is worth $39,000, and the Japanese, who have a real yen for their favorite movie star, they want him back.
Where do you hide something like that? Well,
Godzilla vs. Mothra is a solid entry in the series that I don't really have much else to say about it. Great monster fights, a good human story, and a solid film score by Akira Ifukube once again. Check it out. The one thing to mention is that Mothra's popularity grew really well after this movie, so much so that after Godzilla's final movie in 1995, Toho made a trilogy of movies for her from 1996 to 1998 called Rebirth of Mothra. 3 movies I'll cover in its own video sometime in the future, but not during this Godzilla marathon. Until then, the next movie is a soft remake of another film in the series. Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla II, a soft remake of Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, though this time Mechagodzilla is the good guy and Godzilla is the bad guy. The plot involves a group called the G-Force getting the robotic parts of Mecha King Ghidorah out of the ocean, and they use the parts to build Mechagodzilla to fend off Godzilla. Meanwhile, a large egg is found on an island somewhere, to which Rodan shows up and tries to take it, until Godzilla arrives to stop him. The researchers take the egg and a baby dinosaur hatches out, pretty much confirming that this is Godzilla's baby. So G-Force decides to research the baby in order to find out Godzilla's anatomy and figure out a way to kill him dead. So while Godzilla's going on a rampage to find his kid, the G-Force send out Mechagodzilla to fight Godzilla. The first fight ends up being a failure as they try to paralyze Godzilla, but he just reverses it on Mecha-G and knocks him down. Later on in the movie, they develop a new weapon that could be attached to Mechagodzilla and turn it into Super Mechagodzilla. Super Mechagodzilla actually manages to kill Godzilla. Yeah, they kill Godzilla in this movie. Sounds intense, but it's not permanent. In a rather beautiful scene, Rodan gives his life energy to Godzilla, which revives and powers up Godzilla and he's able to annihilate Mechagodzilla. It's one of my favorite scenes in the whole Godzilla franchise. It's always stuck with me ever since I watched it for the first time. Afterwards, Godzilla gets his son, then returns to Birth Island, which is where he lives pretty much. Happy ending. Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla II is a decent film, but I think my biggest issue with this movie is actually the monster fights. Don't get me wrong, they're entertaining, but not as action-packed as previous films. They do carry emotional angles towards them, so these scenes do succeed in that fashion. And the rest of the movie is pretty solid. There's a really sweet plot point where one of the characters, Azusa Gojo, is the first to see baby Godzilla after it hatches. After that, it becomes increasingly attached to Azusa, and it's really cute. It's one of the sweetest things ever put into a Godzilla movie, really. There's also the psychic Mickey, who's a returning character, one of the only reoccurring characters in these movies, and she's part of the G-Force group like the previous film. There's a few scenes showing a specific song that can rile up baby Godzilla, so near the end, Mickey plays the song for baby Godzilla telepathically to help strengthen him into confronting his dad. It's a really sweet scene, and it's also a nice way to end the film. When it comes to Mechagodzilla, I'm not the biggest fan. I like the finished look and overall design that he has, but at the same time, he has no personality, and I just don't like the roar too much. It just comes off more as a military machine than an actual adversary for Godzilla to face. I wonder if I wasn't the only one to complain about this, because the next Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla reboot would do something more interesting with Mecha G's plotline. Also, there's a mistake I made in the Terror of Mechagodzilla review that I probably should address. As you all may remember, that was Ishiro Honda's last Godzilla movie, but I did mention there were plans to have him direct this movie, but he died before production began. It turns out this wasn't completely true. Ishiro Honda actually wasn't too fond of the Heisei movies. He was often critical of them for lacking imagination, and he said he had no real desire to return to the series. It turns out the reason this Mechagodzilla II rumor started was because Godzilla's suit actor at the time, Kenpachiro Satsuma, had a conversation with Ishiro Honda one time when he visited the set of one of the Godzilla movies in the 90s. Sometime before Honda died, Kenpachiro asked him if he would direct the next Godzilla movie, to which Honda actually said he would. However, Kenpachiro wasn't sure if Honda was being serious or not, as Honda would pass away not too long after telling him this. So yeah, it's not really confirmed that Ishiro Honda was gonna direct this movie. It was just a conversation from Godzilla's suit actor that got taken way out of context. Hope this clears that up. Anyways, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla II is a solid movie where the human story might be more engaging than the monster fights. I think that's an achievement for this film's part. It's one of the most emotionally engaging Godzilla movies I've ever watched. So I definitely recommend checking this film out. It's pretty great. Next time, we look at a movie that was made for the 40th anniversary of Godzilla that's probably the weakest in the Heisei era, sadly enough. What's interesting about Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla II is that it was initially meant to be the last Godzilla movie in the Heisei era. In fact, the original ending had Godzilla dying for real, and his son would have lived on. But plans changed, Godzilla lived, and the series continued. This leads us to Godzilla vs. Spacegodzilla. Okay, that name is pretty dumb. The movie opens with Mothra in space. As it turns out, some of Godzilla's skin cells were attached to her a few movies ago. A few of the cells end up falling off of her and go into a black hole, resulting in the creation of an evil space monster. Spacegodzilla. Okay, was that seriously the best name they could come up with? So yeah, it's an odd plot, but whatever, I'll accept this explanation. However, later on in the movie, Mickey the Psychic explains that the cells actually came from Biollante, and they drifted off into space after she was killed by Godzilla. Okay, the first explanation was weird, but it made more sense, surprisingly enough. The second explanation seems to ignore the fact that the time travel plotline in Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah happened, which erased the events of Godzilla vs. Biollante, and Godzilla 1984 now that I think about it. It makes sense that Mickey would remember Biollante, since she did help change the events which happened in vs. King Ghidorah, but why would she bring up Biollante if she never existed anymore? Oh, who cares? The plot's dumb and makes no sense. So we got ourselves a space monster in outer space who's on its way to Earth to wreak some havoc on Japan, because it's always Japan. So G-Force takes parts of Mechagodzilla 2 and uses them to create a new robot, Mothra. Mothra was actually another giant robot from the Showa era who appeared in the 1957 film The Mysterians, a film directed by Ishiro Honda, who said that was his favorite movie he ever directed. So I guess they put Mothra in this movie as sort of a tribute to the late Ishiro Honda. How sweet. So Mothra has a space fight with Spacegodzilla and it's pretty amusing. The effects aren't too great, but it's still entertaining. Of course, Godzilla's in this film, and he's the main target for a G-Force unit on Burf Island, who try to put a mind control device on him, but it fails, so one of the people there just tries to kill him using a special bullet. Oh yeah, there's also Baby Godzilla, who's much older now and is a lot more adorable. You're so adorable, you're gonna grow up to be a good king of the monsters, aren't you? Cute little thing. It would be a shame if Spacegodzilla showed up to kidnap you, because that's exactly what happens. Great. So the plot now becomes about Godzilla teaming up with the humans and Mothra to stop Spacegodzilla and get his son back. That's pretty much it. The final monster fight is an entertaining spectacle. At first, Spacegodzilla gives both Mothra and Godzilla a rough time, but eventually they both fight back. They blast off Spacegodzilla's ridiculous space crystal shoulders, then Godzilla annihilates that lame bastard with his fire breath. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of Spacegodzilla. Like I mentioned before, his name is stupid and lazy. Plus, he's not too interesting as a villain. He's just sorta evil, and that's it. Even his own roar is just kinda meh. Not too exciting of a monster, being honest. The human story fares a little better. I love seeing Mickey the Psychic get a much bigger role this time around, which will carry on to the next film as well. She's one of my favorite human characters in a Godzilla movie, so whenever I see her in another movie again, I'm always like, yay, it's Mickey! She even has a cute little reunion with Baby Godzilla. It's a short encounter, but it's still really cute. The movie has a very whimsical feel to it, almost similar to Son of Godzilla in a lot of areas, though mainly when Baby Godzilla is on screen, so that's probably not too much of a coincidence. The soundtrack fits the movie too. It's alright, but nothing too amazing. This wasn't Akira Ifukube, sadly enough. He was gonna compose this movie, but declined after reading the script and seeing that there was gonna be rap music included in the film. He wasn't a huge fan of the overall direction. Yeah, he's kind of an old-fashioned sort of composer, so that's kinda understandable. It's still an okay soundtrack. It's nothing too bad, really. Anyways, Godzilla vs. Spacegodzilla is an alright movie. It's just kinda the weakest in the Heisei era, in my opinion. Spacegodzilla is a lame villain, but that doesn't completely ruin the movie for me. I do enjoy watching it, but I wouldn't consider it as great as the last three films we looked at. It's got a good soundtrack, lots of decent emotionally grabbing scenes. In fact, the final scene in the movie is probably one of my favorite endings to a Godzilla movie. Plus, the monster fights are a lot of fun. There are a few things in this movie that do offer giving it a watch. It's harmless. Just an okay, decently made Godzilla movie. Not really much else to say afterwards. For the 40th anniversary movie, they could have done a lot worse. Believe me. Next time we'll look at the very Godzilla movie that I am more than excited to finally talk about. Godzilla vs. Destoroyah, my favorite Godzilla movie. Yes, even better than the original. There's just so much in this movie that I think makes it slightly better than the 1954 movie for me. The plot is excellent. The movie starts out with an immediate Godzilla attack, but this time he's glowing orange for some reason. I love this look for Godzilla. I think it's quite iconic. This is a modified version of another Godzilla suit, dubbed Mechagodzilla, which was also used in Spacegodzilla. Oh, and the suit used in Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla II was called Ratogoji, in case you wanted to know. The people of Japan try to figure out why Godzilla's glowing this way, but it actually takes a young Godzilla aficionado to find out through their own research. Godzilla's heart is kind of a nuclear reactor, and it's melting down. Not only that, but when it reaches full meltdown, Godzilla is going to explode, and cause a massive explosion that's more powerful than all our nuclear weapons going off at once. Holy shit. The same Godzilla fan, his name is Kenkichi Yamane, the adopted grandson of Dr. Yamane from the original Godzilla, great reference, concludes that the only way to stop Godzilla is by recreating the Oxygen Destroyer. However, there can't be another Oxygen Destroyer because the creator, Dr. Serizawa, died with the original Godzilla. Except another research group are doing experiments where they try to find life inside of oxygen-less tubes. This leads to the creation of an initially small monster who grows into a freaky-ass being. They're called Destroyers in the movie, but the official name for these bad boys are actually Destoroyahs. Hell yes, that is an excellent name. Toho wanted to call the monster Destroyer, but didn't want to risk putting a patent on an everyday used word. So they came up with an original name, Destoroyah, instead. They didn't want to pull a Fine Brothers is pretty much what happened. This leads to scenes of these Destroyers attacking police and innocent civilians. I love these scenes. It's like you're watching a classic horror movie. And these full-scale, practical animatronic Destroyers are amazing. Just makes me prefer this over CGI any day. They made this work incredibly well. and these mofos are very powerful. They can evaporate living organisms with their atomic breath, and also have an extra mouth in their mouth, kinda like the xenomorph in the Alien franchise. Very inspired design, and also a clever way of villainizing the Oxygen Destroyer into an actual powerful monster. After torching these monsters, the G-Force goes back to trying to cool down Godzilla, which leads to the introduction of the Super X3. Dang, we haven't seen the Super X in quite a while. And the third model looks pretty great, even though you could see the strings in some shots, but it's okay. There's a cool scene, pun entirely intended, where they freeze Godzilla. The effect looks really cool. It really makes me wonder how they did all this in 1995. This is such a technically well-made movie. There's also a plot point of Mickey, the recurring sidekick in these movies, who opens up the movie with her seeing that Burf Island has sunk into the ocean after a volcanic eruption, the same eruption that kickstarted Godzilla's meltdown look. She's worried for Godzilla's son, who's now going by Godzilla Jr., but she thankfully finds him and holy crap, look at him! He looks almost exactly like his dad! Wow, it's about time! That's what Mickey's main plot is about. She's looking over Godzilla Jr. most of the movie. She's also introduced to another psychic in the movie, Maru Ozawa, another member of the G-Force. Yeah, we have two psychic characters now. Why not? I like that they pretty much become best friends by the end of the movie, spending most of their time together looking over Godzilla Jr. There's even a scene where Mickey holds Maru's hand to strengthen their psychic abilities while they look over Jr. It's a really beautiful scene. The two also share probably one of my favorite comedy bits in a Godzilla movie that I feel is pretty underlooked.
できないわジュニアをおとりにするなんて。ジュニアはアドナー島に帰ろうとしてるのよ。ミキ、世界に目を向けて。そんな監視を捨てた方がいい。今は何としてもゴジラのメルトダウンを阻止することだけを考えようよ。あなたが行かないのなら、私一人のパワーでもジュニアの方向を変えてみる。
What's pretty awesome about Junior being much older in this movie is that he actually gets to have a real monster fight. Yeah, after all the Destoroyahs combine together to create one giant monster, Junior actually battles it first as Mickey and Maru watch him. It's a great fight, and it's awesome to see Junior manage to win too. The kid's come a long way in the course of 3 films. This eventually leads to Junior and Godzilla having a little reunion right before the climax. However, as they get close to each other, a greater evil appears. The complete final form of Destoroyah appears from the fires of hell, and oh man does he look scary. His design is probably the most unique ones I've ever seen for a Godzilla monster. Destoroyah just grabs Junior and drops him on a coliseum, mortally wounding him, but he's not dead though, wink wink. Godzilla goes to his body and breathes some of his life force into Junior to try to heal him, but it doesn't work, at least not immediately. However, Destoroyah isn't quite done. He grabs Godzilla, drags him all around the ground, slices into him a bunch of times. He just basically fucks up Godzilla, until Godzilla rises back up and has had enough. He fights back, and it's awesome. He makes Destoroyah's body all bloody, and blasts a part of his face right the fuck off. With Destoroyah pretty much mortally wounded himself, he tries flying away like a little bitch. But thanks to Godzilla's damage he inflicted upon Destoroyah, the military shoot Destoroyah out of the sky, and he plummets to the floor, dying in a really awesome explosion. Then, in one of the most emotional scenes ever put into a Godzilla movie, Godzilla starts melting down, and the military start cooling him off so the explosion doesn't harm anyone. Through the quiet audio accompanied by an amazingly beautiful piece of music by the great Akira Ifukube, we watch as Godzilla slowly dies from melting down. It's so good and so well executed, and honestly did get me to tear up whenever I first saw this movie as a little kid. Even now, I still find myself getting goosebumps from the music and the overall scene. It's just so beautifully shot, and the filmmakers did an amazing job with Godzilla's death. The best job they could have done, if I say so myself. I hear some people complain about how Godzilla didn't directly kill Destoroyah himself, but I still like thinking that Godzilla wounded him enough to where the military could finish the job. There does exist alternate footage where when Destoroyah lands on the ground, he doesn't explode, and Godzilla still tries finishing him off during the meltdown phase. This scene was cut from the final movie because the filmmakers didn't want to take the attention away from Godzilla's death scene. And honestly, I think they made the right choice. I do love this alternate ending footage, and I love that image of Godzilla holding on to Destoroyah's horn, fighting until his last breath even. But I think it was a smarter idea to have Godzilla's death scene focus on just Godzilla. The build-up to it is still excellent and is still perfectly executed. The one thing about this scene that still gets me is Godzilla's final roar. It's like one final call from the hero before he's gone. It really does feel like the real deal this time. Godzilla is dead. With Godzilla finally gone, Tokyo is left a ghost town as everyone, including Mickey and Muru, pay their respects to the fallen king of the monsters. All seems sad and unhopeful, but... Aw shit, Godzilla Jr. lives on! Just when you thought this ending was gonna be all dour and sad, Godzilla Jr. comes back all like, I lived, bitch. Perfect ending to an excellent Godzilla movie. God damn. I love this movie. I love everything about it. I love the effects, I love the plot, I love the soundtrack, I adore pretty much every aspect about this film. It is one of the best Godzilla movies ever made, and my personal pick for my favorite Godzilla movie of all time. It's packed with so much emotional baggage and amazing monster fights that I simply cannot recommend this movie enough. The perfect end to the Heisei series, and for its time, the perfect end for Godzilla. The film did amazingly at the box office, though it is probably because right on the poster it literally said, Godzilla dies. Spoilers? This was meant to be the final end-all be-all Godzilla movie from Toho, as America signed a deal with Toho to make their own series of Godzilla movies in the early 90s, until being delayed to 1998, and we'll get to that. But anyways, Godzilla vs. Destoroyah would end up being the last Godzilla movie to be composed by Akira Ifukube, as he would completely retire after this movie and passed away in 2006. Not only was this Akira Ifukube's last Godzilla movie, this is also the last movie to have Kenpachiro Satsuma portray Godzilla. Fucking props to this man for putting up with the role for almost 11 years. And with that smoke coming out the suit and shit in this movie, he actually passed out in the suit during filming. What a trooper. That's a well-earned retirement. However, not only was this Ifukube and Satsuma's last Godzilla movie, this was also another important figure's last film too. Who exactly? Tomiyoko Tanaka, who was not only the last surviving Godzilla creator, but he was pretty much the producer and executive producer on pretty much every single Godzilla movie since the 1954 original. He was always there putting money into these projects, no matter how ludicrous they became, or even if it was a movie that he wasn't fond of. This man supported Godzilla literally until his dying breath, which came in April 1997. A legacy he left behind that will never be forgotten. And his mark on cinema will always be remembered by Godzilla fans, or even any film nut who has the slightest respect for Godzilla as a franchise. Rest in peace, Mr. Tanaka. Thank you for an excellent run of 22 movies, including my favorite era of Godzilla movies. Glad you were there to see it all happen. Thank you. Now, I wish I could say the next movie was a respectful tribute to that man's legacy with Godzilla, but it just isn't. Until then, I'm coopercastille, and thanks for watching my Godzilla series all the way up to this point. We're getting pretty close to the end, so let's keep going. I'll see you around.